the first flame quickly fades. Darkness will shortly settle, but one day, tiny flames will dance across the darkness, like embers linked by lords past.
Oh, Elden Ring.
Oh, Elden Ring
is a beloved 2002 franchise created by Fromsoftware and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment. It's a story written by both Hidetaka Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin. Elden Ring is an action RPG with non-conventional open-world elements, taking the player to between fantastical lands never seen before. Today, we're here to ask one of the most controversial questions in gaming. Is it part of the Soulsborne series? But know this, it's more about food for thought, so fear not the dark as we search the depth of the Golden Order, and let the feast begin. When this discussion pops up about our topic, usually the quote from Misu is thrown around. I heard earlier that this work is aimed at the royal road of evolution of Dark Souls. But why did you launch a completely new IP at this time instead of Dark Souls 4? But this was said by an interviewer, not Hidetaka himself. He actually clarifies the name difference in an interview with 4Gamer. 4Gamer said, I think it was a challenging title, referring to Elden Ring. If 2 came out, it may be a hot seller, but Fromsoftware doesn't like making a sequel by taking advantage of its name value. Dark Souls continue, but it was a break. Miyazaki replies, that point is case by case. There are merits about taking over the numbering and creating a game with a new title. I would like to select things as appropriate. The interviewer from Fromsoftware said that he heard this is a completely new IP, but from where? It may go back to a different interview in 2016. In April this year, Miyazaki revealed that Fromsoftware has started development of a new IP. These statements were before the release of Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and the reboot of Metal Wolf Chaos XD. Additionally, Miyazaki said that Dark Souls isn't finished, but rather it's in its turning point. If someone said they want to make a Dark Souls game using the latest in technology, and if it is really interactive, it wouldn't be fair for me just to finish the series. This is confirmed when Mr. Miyazaki spoke with GameSpot in E3. Sekiro is not designed as an evolution of Soulsborne, of the Souls series. It was designed from the ground up, from scratch, as an entirely new concept, as an entirely new game. In contrast, he said, I think Elden Ring is a more natural evolution of Dark Souls. So, Fromsoftware acknowledged Dark Soulsborne is something of a series. Its genealogy doesn't contain every game in their library. Does this mean there's going to be another entry? Or is the Dark Souls canon completely closed? Mr. Miyazaki goes on his GameSpot interview. I want to go back to the Dark Souls series and make one more game before I retire. I don't want to be branded as a liar if that happens. Why would he be branded as a liar if he never promised that he would make another entry in the series? Unless he did, not to his audience or interviewers, rather an old friend perhaps. Who are we to call one of the directors of old Elden Ring a liar? But how is Elden Ring genetically linked with Dark Souls? In Dark Souls' cinematic, we're introduced to one of 3 things that are characteristic of the Age of Ancients. The everlasting dragons. These particular dragons are covered in scales of rock, which are typically credited for their immortality. And Elden Ring may have returned these familiar creatures as ancient dragons. This title might strike as familiar for those who know the various dragon items. In Elden Ring, these 4-winged beasts have a similar legendary immortality. As the dragon scale blade tells us, a weapon made by sharpening a gravel stone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon immortality, into an unclouded blade. You may see proof of this as Grand Sex's corpse is displayed in Lindelt. Just as Dark Souls introduced us to the everlasting dragons, they also spoke of Erdtree. This forest of Erdtree by the time we, the player, first visit are growing in Ash Lake. Likewise, as Max Derrat compares and contracts for the Erdtree.
These trees function much like the world tree from Norse mythology, in that the worlds of the Dark Souls games exist either on top of the Erdtrees or on their branches. Take notice of the way that they are spaced out and how they reach up into the sky. Now, in Bloodborne, we see something similar in the hub area known as the Hunter's Dream. Pillars that are evenly spaced out and that stretch up into the sky. I, like many other people, theorized that these are either a reference to Erdtrees or are Erdtrees. In Elden Ring, we see references to both of these elements. In the area known as Siofra River, we see the same visual of the trees/pillars stretching upwards and being evenly spaced out.
Watch his video if you want thorough analysis of the Erdtrees. The link is in the description, and to add to his point, the Erdtree is canonically hollow. In the same fashion, so is Mirrah, who needed the start of a new age. Another thing of note is that in Dark Souls' intro, the Japanese term for Erdtrees is great trees. That may sound familiar to fans, as that sounds like the same plant found in item rune's description like the root risen. There's a bit of a controversy about this item, because the English distinguish the Great Tree and the Erdtree, where the Japanese translation doesn't. What is somewhat clear is the differences of roots, with one taking over the other. He prescribes with Ziostorm's theory on this may have taken place.
The only true goal of an inhabitant of the garden is to cultivate the thing most like itself. This is a territory war to break down the nutrients, or in this case, the souls of the dead. It's one big competition to see who can decompose the world. But it's thanks to these roots that the Greater Will was able to thrive in the lands between like it does now. But something that always struck me was how its trunk is so thin, and the branches spread out like a flat cap of a mushroom, specifically like a chanterelle mushroom, which are also yellow and white and have a look of bark to them.
He goes further detail on how this was brought about, and this mushroom theory seems to strengthen over time. There are those who say that these things in the Sophia River look more like pillars or Portugal rocks, which is an issue considering Dark Souls 3's Erdtrees look more stone-faced than these. These pillars throughout the map are typically smooth, where the Erdtrees near us look more rigid. The skeptics are still making a good point. Are these linear objects even trees? For that, we need to venture to Mogwen's palace for a closer look. The Lake of Blood, where the locals are chill and the water's fine. It's here we can uncover the mysteries of these cylinders. They look like what you expect from trees. If you go past the Gashadukuru summoning of Albanorth, near the entrance of the Colosseum, it's revealed that these trees do in fact have roots. One trunk even appears to have a shoot sprouting out of it. I guess branching out to the skeptics help us answer a question that left us previously stumped. Appearing in almost every Soulsborne games, the hater of clerics, the antagonist of greed, the ever-trustful Patches. Now with his new entry in Elden Ring, he even breaks the fourth wall if you don't forgive him.
It's the same old story everywhere I go.
And
This simply isn't like you.
critics will object to this iconic character having anything to do with the series, as his introduction began in 2008, Armored Core 4 Antras, as Patch the Good Lord. Fromsoftware may have already addressed this 2009 title, 3D Game Heroes. During our journey, we gathered enough gold that we could buy a weapon from an elder for 5,000 G. Looks like we're not the only one who suffers from inflation, which is the Kurosawa, a well-known laser rifle from the Armored Core series. It's described as a sword engineered with lost technology. This suggests that the two games share the same timeline. Later in our 3D Game Hero adventure, we can get the Moon Sword, or the Moonlight Sword in Japanese, from the From Cave. Its description reads, this sword belongs to another world. So, there's different worlds, and things in one world can manifest in another. If we apply this to characters, this might explain why Patches only appears in 4 Answer, and not in 5 or Verdict Day, and never again. Unless Fromsoftware is preparing a surprise for us. This is consistent with Armored Core, as there are multiple universes in the series, with the games Mr. Hiyataki was involved in having their own separate universe, and consistent with Dark Souls.
The very fabric wavers, and relations shift and obscure. There's no telling how much longer your world and mine will remain in contact.
Or they're not relevant. Who knows?
Take care.
Fans have pointed out that the Raging Wolf helm looks like Brayton's mask design that resembles the Knights of Mirrah, but with some odd differences leading to some that say it's an imitation. What is this mysterious land of Mirrah, of the east across the ocean of Dren Lake? The Shadow Dagger tells us that Mirrah is the land of knights, where exists an order of Shadow Knights who carry out assassinations in the cover of darkness. Don't these mercenaries from Mirrah look oddly familiar? Maybe it's just a coincidence, as the dagger description sounds more like the Black Knight assassins, who themselves look more like the forlorn or the fallen child of original sin. They have lost their corporeal forms and a world to call their own. Now they drift into other worlds, who are told tales of the painted world by heretical storytellers. But one beacon of hope in Dark Souls 2's holy water urn that's decorated with the tree on the bottle describes the old capital of Mirrah with its spring that produces holy water, which scalds the skin of the undead. Kinda reminds me of the holy water pot, which is highly effective against those who live in death. The urn goes on to say, Mirrah became embroiled in war. One axe that could have been used in this war is implied to originate from the Knights of Mirrah is the Dragon Slayer axe, for the lightning and pulsations within its blade, but one used it to slay men. So, Mirrah's armory was involved with dragons, war, and lightning. It would be redundant to see how these could be implied to the events unfold in the Altus Plateau. If you think it's impossible that Mirrah and the land between are related, then you're probably right. Although remember the Queen's advice to King Venru.
She warned our lord of the looming threat across the seas, of the giants. The king crossed the ocean and defeated the giants, with the queen at his side.
When we look for answers outside Dark Souls lands beyond the fall, one group of people stands out. In Dark Souls 2, there's an establishment called the Erdtree sect, or the Ancient Dragon Institution in Japanese. Little is known about the order, but their followers are referred as pilgrims who are warriors on a long journey. The Erdtree sect looks very samey to the Banished Knight sect, worn by knights who are forced to abandon their home. We're not told why these knights were banished, but many of them seem to have a lot in common with Dragon Communion. What we do know is that the dragon cult started in Lindelt. On the other side of the scale, the Erdtree pilgrims are keepers of Lindelt histories. Where is Lindelt? Lindelt isn't accessible in Dark Souls, but is home to clerics who are subject to authoritarian rule. Many of them often travel to distant lands, some for aesthetic training, others as a means to liberate themselves. Lindelt's monastery is the originator of many miracles and perhaps the monastery charm, which cures poison and restores HP. It's not unlike the Dragon Charm, which also cures poison and restores HP. Both of these charms' iconography is very similar. These appear to have a tree symbol on the center. So, we have an order that creates miracles with its members venerating dragons with dragon statues on top of their head, and possibly uses tree symbolism, being compared to a group of people who commune with dragons, have dragon statues on top of their helmets, from a place that possibly known for their tree symbolism and faith incantations? I mean, could these two be the same place? I don't know. Let's ask an ancient dragon. I hear their memories are crystal sharp. What do you think? Is this too much of a stretch?
From beyond the fog.
One particular parallel that stood out between Elden Ring and Dark Souls, the Golden Order, the Way of White. The Way of White is an order of cleric knights, with their deity being All-Father Lord. All-Father in the Japanese is Shushin, which actually means Chief God. A title could be comparable to Radagon. Radagon's name, possibly after a demigod, who is deemed as Father of the Gods. In ancient Middle Eastern religions, it was their head deity for a period of time, as Ra was for the ancient Egyptians. The Way of White, according to the Paladin armor, may have produced the first undead in the outside world. In Japanese, it's clarified as Itunosaka, the human world. The Way of White's creation, yet its distinction of the undead sounds strikingly familiar to the origins of the Tarnish.
My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring.
As good as it may seem, orders of the Way of White feared glorious duels of judgment, in which verdicts were carried out by a sword of law. Before Radagon became the consort to America, man turned against man to become champions, even with its contestants being the demigods and Malekith, whom they feared.
My children, beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices.
Those who take part in their covenant can connect to other worlds, in one of which may be Lodrin, home of the gods. The Two Fingers had servants who eliminated the tarnished, who strayed from the guidance, working as assassins, and occasionally helped those in need. Confessors and the Two Fingers assassins are one and the same. The Confessors are loyal servants of the Two Fingers, who houses churches outside the lands between. If we look at the term Thoroughland in the Japanese, it can be translated as Solulando. And if we take the Sidarian meaning of land, we get Soul Haven. While not perfect, we can imply this for Castle Soul, which happens to be one of the places the Exile Knights are located. Exile Knights, who were sent to the Penal Colony, wields as one of their weapons is the Crescent Moon Axe. Correspondingly, one of the weapons used by the Way of White, an incantation from the Golden Order, is the Disgust of Light. Comparatively, one miracle in Dark Souls 3 is the Way of Right Corona, and its description reads long ago, when the imprint left by the gods were still deep. Miracles of the Way of White existed alongside Areolas. Those who yearn for long-lost Areolas fully believe that they would return one day, indicating that the gods that the Way of White is associated with lost their grace or glory. Keep in mind, there is not much about the Way of White in Dark Souls, and by the third installment, All Father Lloyd is forgotten, even by the Way of White members. It's recorded on Lloyd's shield ring, which is decorated with a tree. Those who do remember him, he is considered a fraud. Maybe in comparison, if the Golden War is decimated by the frenzy flame after Radon's exposed of being Mirrah's
Other self.
fire tarnish who whipped their cracks, I guess we might expect their followers to discard them. Many fans are pointing out that Bloodborne can't be the part of the Soulsborne lore, as Mr. Miyazaki called it a new IP when comparing it with Demon Souls. However, if you review the original IGN interview in 2015, it's largely in the context of level design, but Mr. Miyazaki goes on stating it's still along the lines of a Demon Soul experience. There's nothing really spoken against the idea that the Soulsborne lore is not intertwined, except for the 2010 Mr. Miyazaki clarifies that Demon Souls isn't the successor of Kingsfield. That title likely belongs to Fromsoftware's Lost Kingdoms, as they nearly have corresponding premises. So, is Elden Ring a prequel or sequel to the Soulsborne lore? Elden Ring may act more in line with the Norse Midgard or the Celtic Tur Nadal, although it could be a hub for the deities to interact with other worlds. But maybe in Bloodborne, its prequel could be the Age of Stars. In Bloodborne, an organization called the Healing Church truly began contacting outer beings once they unveiled the past within the Chalice Dungeons, the Tomb of the Gods, and its labyrinth. This harmonizes with Ronnie's statement that there'll be a great remove into a 1,000-year voyage. With that said, is there any semblance of proof within the Chalice Dungeons that connect Bloodborne to Elden Ring? If you travel down to the depths, you might find something similar. You see, Elden Ring is the first game from software that highly retains runes. There's one in particular. The Impurity rune reads, Confederates of the League cooperate with hunters from other worlds and hunt it to discover vermin. Vermin writhe within filth and are the fruit of man's impurity. For us all, vermin, without hesitation. And what are we doing as the tarnished exactly? We are banished to the lands between by Mirrah to obtain the great runes from the demigod. Also, the curse mark of death describes the curse mark carved into the discarded flesh of Ronnie the Witch, also known as the half-wheel wound of the centipede. What are the vermin, and what does the curse mark of death look like? Centipedes, kept as a fetish by the Golden Horde fundamentalists, especially the hunters of those who live in death. And the rune design, it's a crucifix with 6 circles that seemingly matches with Mirrah and her heirs. Where there's Mirrah, there's also Malekith, who's the shadowbound beast given to his Imperium. It implies that shadowbound beasts are positions, not just a species for the Imperiums, since the Raging Wolf sect comments, according to old legends, rules on the shadows of the Imperium. Bergram inspired to be such a state himself. This concept of achieving the role or state of being shadows that seem to fall with the blind armored set description. Well-worn black armor of the man wolf Blind, who served as Ronnie's shadow, was a royal ally who would define destiny itself if it would have him turn upon his lady. This idea of changing or enrolling into a beast is in the air of the beast and claw mark runes. The bearer of the beast rune has accentuated transformational effects. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beast. Although the differences are subtle, the runesmith Carol describes the beast as a horrific and unwelcome instinct deep within the hearts of men, while the claw mark is an alluring invitation to accept this very nature. Obviously, you can compare the last statement with the beast claw incantation. It talks about this like an invitation regardless of being horrific and unwelcoming. This acts out in the early round table hole how we first find out about the beast clergyman. This is from Dee's dialogue when he invites you to the bestial sanctum.
How would you like to earn the strength of beasts? If you're inclined to haunt more of those who live in death and weed their death root, then I'll introduce you to Garank, the beast clergyman.
Despite continuing the meeting of demands of the bestial sanctum, Geralt will start attacking you unprovoked if you hand his fourth death root or more. Geralt throughout your exchanges give you beastly items, incantations, and a weapon for death root without fail, which is reflective of the beast's embrace runes. Those who swore to this oath take on a ghastly form and enjoy accentuated transformation effects, especially while wielding a beast weapon. If we dive even further, we read the rune of the beast. The discovery of blood entailed the discovery of undesirable beast. It would be nice if we knew more information about the beastmen to analyze this further, although because it says it's one of the earlier runes and can comment its transformation, this is more aligned with the crucible. Elements of both animals and plants could grow on humans, which was a signifier of the divine in more primitive times. And it's interesting that the beast blood never rots or decays, so it could survive even in a 1,000-year journey. Both anti-clockwise metamorphosis and clockwise metamorphosis runes say the discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the access and deviation that followed was only the beginning. Stating the obvious, we see a relationship between metamorphosis and with the cocoons of Mikola and Millennium. You can also see these runes reflects the twins' curses, one being of decay and the other of eternal youth, both having to do with time. Just as Mo is the Lord of Blood, he was the guardian of 3 fingers. That takes us to nearly perfect Sabiri, who had his eyes gassed out for slander. Eventually, by the flame of frenzy's grace, it dwelled in his sockets. From this, the spread of the flame of frenzy began. This resulted in Chaos's incarnate possessing Yara's essence, as he says.
I fear that you were previously acquainted with this vessel. That is most unfortunate, for he is dead. As for his flesh, he gave it to me. Shabriri.
We see a flavor of this mental impact on the eye rune. An inscription of the eye has spoken the left behind great ones, disillusioned by the limits of human intellect, looked into beings of higher planes of existence, and sought to align his brain with eyes in order to elevate his thoughts. Complimenting, he saw the darkness, or perhaps nothingness, that he discovered tiny beams of light, as described in the guidance rune, as which looks like the outline of the true fingers. As Henrietta leads you to it, she comments,
The distant light is far and frail, so faint it can't be seen by the naked eye. But with everyone's eyes together, it appears.
We go on with the moon rune. The great ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called. Sympathetic in spirit sounds like Ronnie while trusting us, complete strangers, to help her fulfill the Age of the Stars and going as far as to marry us. Or Nicola from his bewitching branch, the Imperium Manicula. Indeed, he has learned very well how to compel such affection. However, the rune's design might tell another tale from Mold's great rune. After the Healing Church experimented on Yharnam with what they found in the Chalice dungeons, they needed hunters to suppress the scourge they perhaps unwittingly released. Their first hunter was Ludwig, and his hunters were known as the Holy Blades. Ludwig's design has a beastly malformation between man and horse, and if you reduce his health, it cuts to
You were at my side all along. A true mentor. My guiding moonlight.
What's interesting about Ludwig's sword, in particular, it has a smooth, if not plain, crossguard and a handle. This feature is only really found in Elden Ring's Dark Moon sword, unlike the other FromSoft Moon swords, except for maybe one. We'll come back to that. Ludwig's weapon has as blue moonlight that dances around the sword, and it channels the abysmal cosmos and hurls a shadowy beam. No other moonlight sword describes itself in this way, which seemingly complements with Elden Ring's sorcery and the abyss. These two weapons are the only moonlight swords that have light almost like water flowing towards their tips out of other moonlight swords. Perhaps being a consort with Ronnie throughout a 1,000-year journey, both of you would create a line of heroes known for their honor and chivalry, teaching them the path that stretches into the darkness. When the time is called, Ludwig would take his steed and the blade bestowed by his ancestor and mentor, then try to conceal the gods once again within their tombs in a game that has some sort of buried within demon souls. Lots of fans are speculating that the Lord of Frenzy ending is resulted into the introduction of Dark Souls 1. However, we don't think this is correct. The first flame may have came from the burning of the Great Tree, assuming it exists, which made its way to the Great Hollow. If you look around the side of Lindelt, you can see ash remains even before we burned the Erdtree, which may be why the deeper depth water is gray. There are some roots down in the depths where the death blight couldn't have overrun them. Could these be burnt? Additionally, this idea may explain why Melena's hands appear to have 3-degree burns, assuming she would be the instrument of this event as the Kindling Maiden. She even describes herself as
burned and bodiless.
in the present tense, yet alive. Ayeta's speech heavily implies that the Lord of Frenzy ending by reforming the greater will into the one great would end all life, and everything would be burnt to ashes. In contrast, it implied that the disunity would have brought forth life.
All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures and births and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
We see a similar creation process during Dark Souls 1's intro. The bed of chaos and recreate the first flame transform into a burning tree, in which it became a nursery for demons. Perhaps the Witch of Basilisk did find the first flame, but it wasn't what she intended. The floating chaos agrees by stating, chaos burns away in the blink of an eye, but was the primordial life born in the bed of chaos, a grievous symbol of Basilisk's sin. There's a parallel found in the Crucible of Tree set. It holds power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erdtree. However, we also propose that the souls descended into the Great Hollow. The bodies in the walking mausoleums are soulless demigods. They are described as slumbering, so they're not dead, yet their souls couldn't be in the Erdtree, as you have to be buried at its roots for your spirit to return.
'Tis a bell calling forth spirits. Summon them with it from ash and return to the Erdtree.
One soul we present is Godwin's, the Dark Souls equivalent of the Lord's Soul. The Souls of Gwyn has been referred as the Lord of Sunlight. Likewise in Elden Ring, Godwyn is associated with the sun. The golden epitaph reveals that this is referring to Godwyn, a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, infused with the humble prayer of a young boy. Lord brother, please die a true death. The Sun Realm shield, as many fans have noted, is exceptionally similar in description of that of Angolondo, a city illuminated by a false sun, since the sunlight, blood, depicting a city grounded by the eclipsed sun, grain of color, the protective star of the soulless demigods. It has seen better days, much like the wear upon the shield. The seed of the sun has long faded away. It aids the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. Strangely enough, the number of soulless demigods are the same as the count of the gods in Dark Souls 1. Additionally, many of the Mausoleum Knights are associated thematically with the Lords of Dark Souls. Stating the obvious, the difference between Godwyn's name and Gwyn's is only 2 letters apart. If they are in essence the same soul, then FromSoft isn't being subtle at all. Virtually both have the same task with the war against the ancient dragons, befriending a dragon who would later teach the army about lightning. You may object to this, as Godwyn's body is connected to the Erdtree's roots. However, arguably, that's not his original body. This is what Sorcerer Rodier has to say about it.
The misshapen corpse under Stormveil. That is a sacred relic of the Black Knives plot, as that famed night of assassination is known.
This is the head of Godwyn. As a soulless demigod, this is expected as all of them are decapitated as sacrifices. This came to this reason that Godwyn regrew himself whole again. We suggest that his entire body regrew within the deep root depth from his head under Stormveil Castle. Now, you might say, wasn't Martin responsible for the Pantheon in Elden Ring? FromSoftware started off giving Martin these very vague, broad themes and ideas for the mythos that Miyazaki had swimming around his head, along with what kind of games we typically make, and all sorts of themes we like to explore in our games. If Martin had written the game story, Miyazaki would have worried we might have to draft from it. Miyazaki wanted him to be able to write freely and not feel restrained by any obscure mechanic that one might have to change in development. Perhaps mechanics such as blood, rot, even sleep maybe? All these mechanics are integral parts of several demigods. So what did Martin really work with? George R.R. Martin was also assigned to improve the name of the demigods of Elden Ring. We might answer these questions in the original name based on the name engraved ring description from Dark Souls 2, which always states, perhaps they are the very same gods as yours, only known by different names at the end. And each one of these listed as the following: Nor Alma, god of blood, whose followers take to a violent path. The patron god of the Brotherhood of Blood Covenant, as like Molong and Vier's Westlawn, Zinder and Zandro, gods of desire and greed respectively, both snakes possibly being the other, as the god-devouring serpent, and Rykard. Galeb, god of disease, influencing both the onset of disease and their causes, as Melania, who released her bloom in Caelid. Velka, a black-haired road deity, and the goddess of sin. The crow is also the symbol of Velka as the Gloma Queen. We will expand upon this later on. Kathar, who mourns the undeserving dead and loved ones left behind. This is going to be complicated, to keep this first in mind for another section. For Elden Ring, it fits Renala mourning over Ranni, which we hear after you defeat her. Criminal, god of struggle, who rewards the perseverance of others as Morgoth, but inversely. Fearam is the god of war, who blessed the armor design and the style of the Lion Knights of Furasa. In my opinion, the title God of War is more of an occupational yet divine status than a causal being. As the North Wanderers said, inform us there are multiple war gods. Horalu was the first one to bear this title. with the Association of Beasts and its champions outfit being similar to Lion Clown warriors and their clothing. After America banished Godfrey to the Badlands, Radon may have taken the title God of War, as his and his army's armor are modeled after the Golden Order, which he loves so much. In Dark Souls 2, there's a character named Aldia, scholar of the first sin. He made it his mission to understand the secrets of life, and his title implies such secrets is the first sin. With failed experiments to leave his undead curse, he became this monstrosity. In Elden Ring, the first sin is a prophecy yet to happen, found in the fire's deadly sin incantation. The prophet despaired, looking up to the Erdtree, for soon the kindling will burst into flame, bringing ruin. The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. That is not the domain of mere men. Even in the animation of burning the Erdtree is identical how the chosen undead links the first flame. What about the Lord of Frenzy ending itself? Does it relate to Dark Souls at all? After the lands between Winter Blaze, we see Melina picking up her ring from the ashes. What if this ending branches out to the beginning of Dark Souls 3? It's generally assumed that the ashes in Dark Souls 3 is the result of the world being burnt by the linking of the first flame, but no trailer or dialogue ever mentions this. It might explain why it's the last of the series, since there won't be any more souls left to descend. So as of now, we don't know who exactly is the Glowmine Queen, but leaning on the popular theory that she might be Melina, this continuum might explain why there is virtually no gods left in game except for Velka. Even Zanro and Xander aren't mentioned despite having identical rings between Dark Souls 2 and 3. If there's any relationship between Melina and Velka, then her pronouncement began to make a little more sense.
Lord of frenzied flame, I will seek you as far as you may travel to deliver you what is yours.
The Glowmite Queen followers used to hunt the gods. Likewise, in Dark Souls 1, there are those who wish to destroy the very gods. The followers of the occult once attempted to steal the power of the Great Lord Nito, which is the power of death, by using the Dark Ember. Members have a choice of 3 weapons that are innately infused with the occult. 1, the Dark Hand, related to Keith, another being Volka's Rapier, and lastly, Priscilla's Dagger, owned by a crossbreed, who few people suspect is the daughter of Volka. To tie this even beyond where it should be, the Elden Ring and Malakos Arena, as the Reddit user Deadski pointed out, it's like the replica of the Corruption Rune, as the rune graphic comparisons with the Godplayer's sword and the Onyx blade suggest this heretical queen has a resemblance of the Glowmine Queen, who wants to end the Golden Order, and Velka, the goddess of sin, who is said to have a great range of influence, even as gods, as to mete out the punishment of others. At this point, you may be thinking, this video is a complete mess, a quagmire of reflected themes. One such theme that's completely swamped is the Omens and their enemies in Dark Souls. One such enemy is described, the Grooves. The Grooves are the descendants of the Acolytes taught under one of the twin satyr creatures, who later allied with the Undead Legion long ago. They reside in the toxic marsh within Farron's Keep. One Groove, the Elder Groove, in particular, would occasionally summon spirits, a flavor to that of the Omens. Another Groove is the Spearman Groove, who looks like Margaret when using his spear. You may chalk this up as merely symbolism, but consider this. In German, Gott is translates in English as God, and Moor is likely the phonetically identical German word for Moor. When you combine these together, it translates as Bog God, or God of the Bog, a fitting deity for the Groove. This could explain why Fromsoftware places Morgoth with such importance, as they add their mires. This perhaps explains his rune with increased HP, since their poisonous marshes typically cause players to lose their health. But alas, he would suffer the same fate as the other gods, with Velka being one of the last deities in Dark Souls 3. Perhaps when the church stopped receiving the divine revelations from above. Several gurus looked below, only to become smoldering gurus who had weapons that induce bleed and casting chaos pyromancy that the primordial life is born from, notionally akin to Moog in Lindelt's shunning grounds guarding the three fingers, the same fingers that elevate you to a crowning tranquility, the Lord of Frenzy. We begin with Mad Tongue Albert, a Tarnish of the Round Table who invades your world. His attacks ranges from ice projectiles to freezing nips from his main weapon, but on his other hand, he'll occasionally summon a ring of thorns from his Staff of the Guilty, which is a staff fashioned from a smoldering weathered sapling that turns the blood of sacrifices pierced by into glintstone. The same staff the thorn sorcerers use, the same sorcerers who tend to leave these totems that look eerily similar to the Helphen steeple, among other things that Fungi pointed out.
Greatsword patterned after the black steeple of the Helphen, the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. As an interesting side note, the Mirrah blade from Dark Souls 3, which clearly served as the design inspiration for the Helphen steeple, had a somewhat similar effect, boosting the attack of the wielder when they took severe damage. There is one thing which could be described as a lampwood. In various locations throughout the Lands Between, you can find these odd, translucent candle trees. Tree wooden shield, found in Sage's Cave, depicts something which resembles these strange spirit trees, and the description for the shield says, "Thought to represent a surreptitious prophecy of cardinal sin, the lit candle tree design was forbidden."
While Fungi and I have our differences on what this represents for this video, we're going to look how these relate to Dark Souls. There are two candidates for the Limpwood. In Dark Souls 2, our player will try to travel to Rhine Lake. In order to venture there, he must encroach a tree illuminated by fireflies. They, under a blood moon, will ignite torches to signal the dead. The dead will open the abyss for the player, so the undead travel to Drunway. Well, it's not about the removal of the curse. America did say about leaving the lands of between as the Tarnish. Where did they go? Well, Mr. Miyazaki has said that Elden Ring was inspired by tabletop RPGs like RuneQuest. In those games, there's a war pool called Magus' Pool that leads to the underworld. The Garden of Eyes has found something similar, and the map does seem to support there's land under the clouds where the Tarnish left on boats with their lord. This tree for the lampwood one initiates a cyclone so the cursed could go elsewhere. Another candidate for the lampwood takes us to the ashes of Arendelle in the Painted World. One of the enemies is the birch or tree women. As you can see, they're covered in pale bark, with few of them are decorated with tiny lights, much like the tree lamps in Elden Ring. It's largely theorized one with flames are related to the souls of those who died nearby, with one of them in particular being the mother of Sullivan, as her body holds the spell he left behind in the Painted World. Afterwards, Sullivan would discover the profane flame below Arendelle. The profane flame in Japanese is Tsuzumi no no, the flame of sin. Consumed the capital of sin after Yorm the giant became the Lord of Cinder. The fire born from the sky said to be incinerated not by human flesh, just as the flame of frenzy is only effective against the tarnished, where the flame of sin remnants describes as part of the dark.
Lords, where did you happen upon this coal? This is much too dark. I see the abyss in it.
Sullivan's fascination of the dark and the outside world possibly enlisted himself to the Dark Moon Knighthood in service of Gwendolyn, the last heir of Gwyn and the guardian of his tomb.
Halt! This is the tomb of the great Lord Gwyn, tarnished if thou art a true disciple of the Dark Sun. Cast aside thine ire. Hear the voice of mine self, Gwendolyn.
Despite Sullivan's ordinance, he would later betray the order and feed the god to Eldritch. After the light arose from the Cathedral of the Deep, the Cathedral of the Deep had its own institution where they used thorny whips to produce puddles that caused heavy bleeding for their cleaning rituals, just as the Playlets used thorn whips of weapons that induced constant bleed for fearsome religious encouragement. This leads us to Arena.
I am frightened of the dark that gnaws away at me.
Supported by the Locust Preacher.
She lived in fear of the dark, of the things that gnawed at her flesh, and yet the abyss hath yet to produce any such creature.
Yet only found in one Soulsborne game. The Swarm of Flies incantation. But no, all Arena is referring to is a miracle used by evangelism. Its item description reads, Dark miracle taught in the Cathedral of the Deep. Thousands have pointed out the link between Arena of Weeping Peninsula, who many suspect is Hyetta, and Arena in Dark Souls 3. Then you've already been told about her connection with the Apostle Morn. Then you already know that Morn taught miracles about the pressing tears is a tale of many deaths surrounding the goddess Keitha, whom Morn was a known follower, supported by the red tear stone ring, Keitha, who shed tears as red as blood. Where do we find this goddess of tears? According to Morn's helm, modeled on Morn, the Archbishop Apostle. Helm is a perfect likeness to the stone heads of the cathedral. A Karam Knight will dedicate their entire career to attending a single maiden, just as Morn served one goddess alone. The Archdeacon's legends support this even further. The only goddess present in the cathedral is Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. Rosaria's name means crown of roses in Italian. And as we know, roses are affiliated with thorns, who is, according to her twin soul, seems utterly an arcane of her, and then try to put it in her old chamber, is likely Guinevere. I'm not the first one to discover this. This means that the lady who is associated with the divine blessing, an item that originates with Guinevere, whom the Magic Academy of Malkia denies even her existence. Similarly, how Royal Lucaria Academy greeted Reynolds after they discovered she wasn't a champion. However, Guinevere may have contacted the deed to produce an error as Lord Cinder only left a cursed crippled child. As a result, she was seen as a demoness to some in the process. We will turn to Rosaria in due time. Speaking of the Dark Moon, remember what we said about Gwyn and his connection with Elden Ring's son. He's not the only celestial entity that pairs with the game. The god of the Dark Moon in Elden Ring is the first time mentioned in the Soulsborne series. Multiple items refer to Gwendolyn as the Dark Moon deity,
Thou that tarnisheth the godmother's image.
and his association with magic, specifically lunar sorcery, the same god that Eldritch consumed, the same Eldritch who envisioned the age of the deep sea and dreamt in a form of a young pale girl in hiding. Pale girl? Dreams? We have heard this before. And the holy symbol of this age of water has the same design as Mold's spear, which is identical to the formless Olden rune. If the player seeks out the bosses throughout the land between, they will discover Nikiichi was kidnapped by Mold, then non-consensually absorb his brother's blood to obtain godhood in the latter's vision. If the player also read the description regarding Elden Ring's sleep-related items, especially the Favors cookbook, then they would know that there's implication that Nikiichi has another half. While we suggest that the overall nightmare within the events of Bloodborne stems from the deities of Elden Ring, particularly St. Trina's. In Bloodborne, we see repeatedly this potent theme about death and motherhood. Likewise, if we travel top of the Erdtree, we see what appears to be a woman, who many suppose is St. Trina, with her stomach ripped open. And if we make our way to Mold's arena, we see the body of Nikiichi placed on top of a pelvis bone, evoking an image that his cocoon is that of a womb removed from his body. We see more similar design choices than Elden Ring, reflected in Bloodborne, most notably that of Margot's wet earth and the Elden Beast, Orphan of Cause and the Mikkel, that leaves us with the Moon presence, which the simplest explanation being that the Dark Moon, but it could be another betrayal of St. Trina. If you look at her torch, you can see a similar head design, much like the Moon prisons. If you follow the Sorcerer painting side quest, the artist drops the great hood that reads, a burial shroud of sorts, for those who discover, at long last, the truth they sought. Yes, surely this is the moon that the young Rennala gazed upon. This is only worn by Esgard, Priest of Blood, reveals that there's a second moon in Elden Ring skies that are just as distinctly different from the Dark Moon. If these games are related, perhaps we'll see DLC involving the Blood Moon, which would make Gideon's comment make more sense.
Oh, so that's where the so-called Lord of Blood was hiding himself, eh? A fitting little squat for that deluded maniac to bleat about the revival of his precious dynasty.
We may have already seen a glimpse of this as the skies of Caelid are blood red. It is being held in bay by Gordon. In contrast to the skies around the Helix tree, it doesn't have to do with millennia's blooming. Also, the swamp of Iona, which is under Mog's palace, exhibit these geysers as characteristic of the Lake of Blood, but not characteristic of the Lake of Rock. In the Lake of Blood, there are sacrifices of many people. This takes us to the sacramental bud that reads, believed to originate long ago from a grain of bud cultivated with youthful sacramental blood, a bud that the statue of Mikkel, the god of eternal youth, seemingly holds. If this happens, then the transition between unintended graves to the modern times could make a little more sense. If you're aware of Berserk, this may seem all too familiar to you, as this is how Griffith obtained his dream. In order to make this dream a reality, the Bailiff needs to contact the Godhand and offer a deal to bring forth the eclipse. We have such an object like the Red-Eye Orb, which is described. Some choose to put the orb to other uses. To embark on this path, enter the surface of Rosalia in the Cathedral of the Deep. Right outside the balcony is where we first see the eclipse with the blood star blocked by a dark moon, resembling the dark sign. The dark sign returns to its bearer to the lost bonfire rested at, or at the bonfire at Firelink Shrine, but at the cost of all the souls held. Carriers of the dark sign are reborn after death, but the God Hand's offer requires sacrificing everyone but a few. Much like this deal, blood of sacrifices are what needed to form red glint stones. These stones seem to be imbued in the seal for the rune of death, and near the tip of the Helphen steeple, Elden Ring's Morian blade. Each was the sword resembling the towers of Lundor's stable church. Each church with the founders of the occult, Keith and Velka, goddess of sin. Despite the title, she isn't related to the flame of sin, the fire that was triggered by the cursed relatives of a certain oracle. In the religious sense, an oracle is synonymous for a prophet. With that, a parallel can be made with the fire's deadly sin incantation. The prophet despaired, looking up to the Erdtree, for soon the kindling will burst into flame, bringing ruin. The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin, that it is not the domain of mere men. Not being part of one's domain leads us back to Holberich. Elden Ring really uses fingers as the means to invade others. Exactly how one must pledge oneself to Rosalia's finger covenant while using a red orb. But if you're killed by an invader, you can add them into the Book of the Guilty, which Velka receives, and which unleashes the blades of the Dark Moon. What's your reward for your own invasion? After a hunt as Rosalia's fingers, you collect pale tongues as proof of the red orb invader's victory. It's the same design as Albert's Haunter's tongue, which has been driving him mad from long ago within a location outside this world. What did the writers have to say about this?
The game is called The Elden Ring, and it's a sequel to a video game that came out a few years ago called Dark Souls.
Now, a lot of the ever-wise accusers will incriminate Martin's statement as a product of fusion and stupidity. But the Honorable Minazaki clarifies in his interview with Game Radar that George Martin actually knew about the Dark Souls games. He was aware of them and what they were all about, so that made me happy. That sort of gave me a bit of a boost. I knew immediately from talking to him, it just became apparent his skill and his passion for this fantasy genre and for games as well. This forced many conspiracy theories to desperately cite Minazaki, stating that Elden Ring is a different world from Dark Souls. Or pride. He means a spiritual successor. Well, Elden Ring and Soulsborne games' relationship is very mysterious and very ethereal. Before we continue, let's replenish ourselves with crimson water, a red drink of unknown origins. Oh, you only have crimson tears? Same thing. They're right about it being a spiritual sequel. For the Spirit Tree shield reads, a shield with a blue relief of a spirit tree. A rather well-built shield, decorated by the Spirit Tree, that appears in the allegory of Quela, god of dream. It would appear Fromsoftware switched the roles of Quela as the god of dreams with Mirrah, the deity of love in Elden Ring. This gives credence to user Arclight 1017's theory that George named the demigods after his initials. Why does the things betwixt and the lands between seem to have so many things in common, you ask? I don't know. Ask Yori Tatamura, director of Dark Souls 2, scholar of the First Sin, and co-director of Elden Ring. For the next one, you're gonna have to trade Elden Ring's Dark Moon Sword, given to you by the Snow Witch, for its equal, the old Moonlight Spell. Yes, the one slightly different from the one fashioned of Seath. Perhaps it is rooted in an older memory from not long after the beginning. The one who's protecting the outer god is Moa, who is known to use the Blood Wound incantation. which writes, thrust arm into the body of the formless mother, then to scatter the blood flame and set the area ablaze. The mother of truth braves wounds. Bloodborne fans know this sounds like the formless Odin runes. The great one Odin, black in form, exists only in voice, and is symbolized by this rune. Human or no, the oozing blood of a medium is the highest grade, and the essence of the formless great one. Both Odin and his advent worshipper sporadically seek the precious blood. Just to clarify, in the Japanese, Odin's possessive adjective is gender neutral, as in it's. Finally, we venture past the Basilisk. Here they have new features such as dragon-like feathers, as BonfireVN highlights, and the giant crabs, which are absent in any other Fromsoftware games except for the Souls series. They also appear to carry around crossbows and thrusting swords. They kind of look like Roman souls. According to Dark Souls' 2 guiding book, their identities are completely unknown, as they barely maintain corporeal forms and almost invisible against the mist. Are they fallen soldiers of a war long past, or the remnants of a clan that once dwelled this ancient land? Into the painted world of Ariando, past the lake, River of Rock, to encroach the tribe of Millwood Knights in search of the Earthseeker, an axe that look and behaves like Godfrey's and Godric's weapons, and their helm for epic claims, adorned with antlers believed to grow from the blessed beast, matching the ancestral spirit horn, cut from the horns of the regal ancestor spirit, where new growth buds are from. Further, we find the Millwood Knight set, axe, shield, and what do these reveal? The ethereal oak. However, when discussing about the unification of the Soulsborne series, the interviewer from the Game No Shotokaku podcast is usually wedged in because Tomomi Shimura asked Miyazaki if Demon Souls is related to Dark Souls, but his first response to the question was, "I would be yelled at if I wouldn't say no." He hopelessly attempts to explain away the connections, even appealing to a patch from Armored Core as a dismissal. Officially, it's just a coincidence that they look alike. It's just for fun. Even the interviewer was suspicious, stating the demonstrable. The more you keep explaining it, the more it sounds like you're lying. Is there any proof to the fabrication that the Soulsborne universe isn't connected? Or is Fromsoftware trying to avoid legal trouble but denying the self-evident? We trust that you're smart enough to know the answer. Ugh! You morons can't keep denying after we talked about these scores of this blame spread the way of one highly effective against those who like could no overrun with nonsense where to I want my own Dark Souls with new technology. I want my own Dark Souls with new technology. I want my own Dark Souls with new technology.
Let the feast begin.
The age of Dark Souls is extinguished, but the frenzy flame remains.
May chaos take the world.
May chaos take the world!
As Elden Soulsborne.
Thank you for watching.
Even in this darkest of nights, I see the moonlight.
If it's all just Easter eggs or developers saving time, let's go ahead and call it reference ring or reused ring. Wait, RR. Deepest lore.